Laverne here, and thank you for joining me. May this video be a blessing to you, and may it honor and glorify God and His kingdom. This is the third video on the topic of homosexuality. I made two previous ones in a series titled Love is No Excuse. This video is going to be in response to a video that was posted by Bossman103, and I'll include a link to his video. As well, I'm going to be responding to as many comments as what I can, I guess kind of speaking in a general way to comments that I've received. One of the first things I like to address is those people claiming that I am a homophobic and hate mongerer. That for some reason I hate homosexuals. That anyone who speaks out against homosexuality, then they must be hateful, spiteful, and homophobic. Well, if that's the case, then I am also some kind of phobic when it comes to adultery, to fornication, to liars, thieves, murderers, abortionists, people having abortions. I must also be a hate mongerer and some kind of phobic because I speak out against the Westboro Baptist Church, for I've spoken out against them in the past, and I made it clear in my videos that when we take a sin and we place it above other sins, then we are placing it on a pedestal, and that's wrong as well. That's every bit as wrong as endorsing and supporting sin. That there's these two spectrums, the different ends of the argument. One simply embraces sin and thinks that it's all right, that sin is no longer a problem, that we can live any lifestyle we choose and God no longer has a problem with it. And then we have other people who elevate one sin above all others, and they concentrate and focus on that sin, thinking it's worse than other sins. So if I'm a homophobic and hate mongerer because I speak out against homosexuality, then it's true of all these other sins that I speak out against, that I'm a murderer phobic, I'm a hate mongerer when it comes to murderers and rapists. So this idea is just utter foolishness, and I believe it's an argument that is given by the opposition, by those who support homosexuality, because it helps them sleep at night. If they can demonize Christians, if they can demonize someone like me, it helps them sleep better at night. So hopefully I've addressed that sufficiently. Looking at some of the comments by Bossman, he says that he supports gay rights and homosexuality because it's consensual. Well, whoop-de-doo. It was consensual 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago, and yet it was still considered a sin. We look at Sodom and Gomorrah. Are we to assume that the lifestyle of homosexuality that was going on there wasn't consensual, and that's why it was considered a sin? Of course not. That's the whole point of my video series. Love is no excuse. People who are in a lifestyle of fornication, that they are living common law, that's consensual as well. But do we then say it's no longer a sin? Certainly not. So this argument that it's consensual and therefore should not be considered a sin, it's utter foolishness. And I want to state here that my argument, my videos have been created for the purpose of those Christians who are endorsing homosexuality, who think that it should no longer be considered a sin. I cannot argue against non-believers. You can live any lifestyle you choose. If you don't believe in God, then the arguments against homosexuality is going to fall on deaf ears. My videos are directed to those Christians who are promoting, supporting, endorsing, and enabling the sin of homosexuality. Going on to my next point. Christ didn't deal with sexual crimes. This is according to Bossman. And he asks, if it was so bad, why didn't the Son of God speak out against homosexuality? I addressed this to some degree in my other videos. We can't use this excuse for the same reason we can't use it to support bestiality. Just because Jesus didn't condemn it, that's no reason to say, well, he must have endorsed it. He didn't condemn bestiality, but we know he didn't endorse it. He did speak out against sexual sin. In fact, he put it under a magnifying glass. He took the sin of adultery. People who thought that they were living righteously, that they were not living in sexual sin, that they divorced and then remarried. And he pointed out that this is adultery. He looked at our thoughts and he said, even those who are lusting after, and they're running away with imaginings of having sex with their neighbor's wife, that this is adultery. So he did speak on sexual sin. This idea that because he didn't speak out against homosexuality, we don't see this in the printing in red, that he somehow endorsed it, is foolish. In fact, the opposite is true. We look at the things that he did change, that he said, this is wrong, you've been thinking this all along, but now you need to change your thinking. I gave the example of living in adultery, that he expanded on that sin. He said, you believe this, it's wrong, this is what's right. This is how God views it. We look at the way they thought of eye for an eye. If someone wronged you, you went out and you sought revenge. You hated your enemy. This is the way that they believed. Jesus said that's wrong. You are no longer to hate your enemy, but to love them. You are no longer to seek revenge, but forgive them. No longer an eye for an eye, but rather turn the other cheek. So where the thinking was wrong and Jesus wanted to ratify it and change it, he spoke out about it. He did not, however, change their ideas on homosexuality. He didn't say homosexuality is no longer to be considered a sin. It's simply two people loving each other. So because Jesus did not change it, we know that he still had a problem with it, that it is a sin. Bossman claims that bestiality is not natural in nature because we are driven to reproduce. He argues we can now help gay couples have normal children, and animals can't consent. So these are some of his arguments. Well, what about the animals not consenting? Can you think of another case, another instance where animals are not asked if they consent and yet we do something with them, say like slaughter them, eat them? I don't know of too many slaughterhouses that actually ask the animals if they mind being slaughtered. We don't ask the animals for consent for these things. Why then would bestiality be any different? And I supplied links to videos of interspecies sex, and the animals that are involved certainly, they don't seem to have a problem with it. So to say that there's no consent and so on, that argument is bogus. We do all kinds of things with animals without asking their consent. And even looking at the argument for homosexuality in the animal kingdom, do we know that the dominant one is asking consent of the one that they're having the homosexual sex with? I don't think so. I don't think we know this, but that we can say for sure that it's consensual and therefore we shouldn't have a problem with it within our own species. He claims that I justify my homophobia with one passage. One passage. There's quite a bit more in the Bible than just one passage speaking out against homosexuality. And I think, Bossman, you really need to get into Scripture. This just shows your lack of having read the Bible. You read a few passages speaking about love, and then you say now you know Jesus, that you know the kind of love that he was talking about, and that loving someone means you don't judge them, you don't talk about sin, you don't condemn them of their sin, and so on. We just accept everybody that this is what love means. Boss man, I really suggest that you read the Bible. There's a whole lot more in there than just one passage speaking out against homosexuality. I'd like to go back to this idea that he says that bestiality isn't natural in nature because it doesn't reproduce. He says that today, because of medical miracles and new technology, that homosexuals, gays, can now have their own children. Well, that's something that's come along in the last 50 years or so. Does that mean then that 50 years ago homosexuals were living in sin, but today because of new technology they're not? This argument is so foolish. I just don't know how you can even give it and not realize how foolish it is as it's coming out of your mouth. Science and technology does not dictate whether or not something is a sin. Neither does being consensual identify it as not being a sin. It boggles my mind. He talks about, he asked this question about myself. Would I like someone dictating whether or not I could marry? Well, I'm going to explain something. I'm divorced. I didn't choose the divorce. My wife wanted one. And this is going back when I was still a non-believer. But I cannot marry. I cannot remarry. Otherwise, I'd be living in adultery. So I do not date. And I cannot, for the rest of my life, remarry. It's something that simply will not happen. Jesus tells us that some will be born eunuchs, some will be made into eunuchs, and some will choose to be eunuchs. This is talking about people who are not going to marry and they are going to serve God. Well, if you are of homosexual persuasion, then guess what? You're a eunuch and you are serving God. If you cannot have a relationship with someone of the opposite sex, you've been made into a eunuch, you now serve God. I've been made into a eunuch because I'm divorced. I now serve God. So I hope that answers that question. He asks, this is actually a point of mine. What about incest? This argument that because it's consensual, we need to give homosexuality, gay people, all the same rights as a heterosexual couple. Well, let's extend this. Let's look at other couples then. What about a brother and sister who want to marry? And by denying them the right to marry, we are denying them the same benefits as what a normal heterosexual couple would have. Their rights are being denied because we do not allow brothers to marry sisters. If we will deny them, we don't have a problem with it. Why then is homosexuality any different? You can't use the argument specifically for homosexuality and then deny that argument in other cases. That was my whole point about the bestiality parallel. Bossman claims it's genetic. I disagree with this. I think there's all kinds of scientific evidence that it's not genetic, but rather it's simply a preference. Just like some people prefer to have all kinds of different relationships. They don't want to be pinned down in one relationship. We can say that's genetic. There's all kinds of things we can look at and say it's genetic, therefore we shouldn't hold it against them. It's genetic, therefore we can't consider it a sin. Some people are predisposed to drinking and drug addiction. Does that mean that we should no longer consider those things as sin, overindulging and so on? Just these arguments are just so foolish. Alright, I'm going to end it there. As always, I do look forward to comments and messages. Till next time, peace and blessings.